lots of good questions which indicate that the talk was really thought-provoking, which is great. I will read the questions, and then if the person who has written the question has follow-up questions, then that person can go to the microphone and ask the question. So there are a number of questions. So the first one that I thought was a good question too, a very good one, is how can we change the stigma surrounding curricular development to one of educational potential?
I would hope that the points I made at the end of the presentation would be one way of making that argument. That it isn't just, as this questioner rightly says, that curriculum is typically thought of this educational bureaucracy nonsense that somebody has to do because, after all, so much of education is proceduralized, and so let's have another top-down document, and that everybody will hasten to ignore and say this too shall pass, because in a couple of years the administration, particularly in secondary education, will come up with another document like that, and we will also have another way of wonderfully ignoring that. So instead of thinking of curricular documents as top-down dictates that somebody dreamed up, that rethinking, and that's why I think actually, as desperate as the situation is in higher education, foreign language departments are actually a wonderful place to do exactly like these kinds of things. The paper was getting much too long already, so lots of things got tossed out, but one of them was the extent to which most college-level foreign language departments actually have next to complete freedom over their curricula, believe it or not. There's almost no one that will tell them what to do. So if one were, and they are in the rut they're in, and as I said, by now there are so many reports that specify the nature of that rut, including the famous 2007 MLA Report, where we are happily, or maybe not so happily, celebrating 10 years later. And the question is, so what actually happened? And some folks are looking at this in anticipation of the MLA conference in January, and things don't look so very promising. Forward-looking, the perspectives issue that the MOJ will publish for 2017. Martha Bigelow, of course, is in charge as the editor of that column, will do exactly that. So what has happened? But back to this story, I think what's going to happen is on-the-ground work, that you will have good demonstration objects, so to speak, that will show that the kind of collaborative work, in particular between the SLA research community and foreign language departments, can actually do some wonderful things. There is almost complete freedom on the part of departments. They typically do not fall under the sometimes oppressive assessment regimes that otherwise catch people in secondary education with regard to what you can and you can't do. And if you can make the argument that you are actually overcome what everybody knows to be the bane of the existence of foreign language departments between the 2-year quote-unquote language sequence and the upper-level content courses, you will have winners immediately. I can tell you from our experience, when we made our decision to revamp the curriculum in that 3-year initial phase, when we mentioned this to the dean, that we were thinking of radically, well, in a way not so radically, but rethinking the entire enterprise, he sort of almost fell off his chair. Since when was a department on their own without the Middle States Accrediting Association having told us to do so, to actually rethink its entire curriculum? And then, with that little statement being made, we extracted from him, we never got a dime of money from him, but we extracted from him, and you need to leave us alone for the next 3 years so that we can experiment with this. And better yet, we will redo our, since we were completely on merit-based pay, we will redo our annual evaluations, and it's going to be research, teaching, scholarship, and curriculum development. And we will include criteria for what will count as that, and it's on that basis that you will then set salaries. How's that? That's what I learned in the provost's office. In the end, it's a matter of money, reallocation of money, and they went along with it.
Good. Thank you. Any follow-up question on that? The next question is about students. I think when you were talking about researchers and educators, people involved in this process. The question is, where do you believe the student opinion and perceptions falls into the curricular rethinking? To what degree do you consider or incorporate their opinion into the curricular development process?
I didn't hear the first word. Theoreticians? Is that the main point?
No, where do you believe the student opinion and perception
Student opinion
falls into this process?
I can tell you, of course, there are two very, very important student populations involved here, particularly in higher education programs that have graduate programs, the way mine does, where graduate students, of course, are absolutely critical for the entire project. They deliver curriculum just like the remainder of the faculty does. As a matter of fact, at a point, usually in the beginning, first 2 years of the program, that may be more critical than anything, because if the students conclude, more or less count me out as soon as the language requirement is fulfilled, it's over. There's nothing else you can do. So when we wrote the original proposal, which I wrote only as a question and answer, these are the issues and this is what we could do, A, B, and C. And then we have problem number 2, and this is what we could do, A, B, and C. And then let's think about it as to how we might approach it. One of the key statements I made that initially ruffled some feathers, and I said, and the graduate students need to be part of this discussion, just like the remainder of the tenured or tenure-line faculty. From some very senior folk, at the time I was told this was my social justice kick. I said nothing of the sort. We cannot possibly do this unless we have the graduate students on board. And I can tell you, it didn't take long, and this is wonderful credit to you as graduate students, where even the recalcitrant folks said, we may have claimed lots and lots of experience because we're senior faculty, but the energy, the dynamism, the inventiveness, the creativeness of our graduate students is just wonderful. And they became the driving force behind a whole lot of this. Absolutely no doubt, and I have published on that in several places. We could not have done it without the graduate students, and that it was very clear. And the second student population, of course, is then the undergraduates to whom you're going to teach this kind of a curriculum. And that is a challenge too, because they're not used to being taught that way. And many of them, even if they started German from the beginning, had notions of what our normal functional instruction in language teaching would look like. So where's the grammar? Where's the vocabulary list? Where's all of this? Because we ditched everything. The only thing we retained was the beginning level textbook. In my radical initial proposal, I said, let's ditch that too. But my colleagues were much wiser than I was and said, we can't, because we are redoing everything else. So we spent several summers then for the first 3 years creating our own materials and discussing amongst ourselves what we thought would be necessary to get them to the advanced levels of literacy that we were aspiring to. And initially, the undergraduates, there was sort of a questioning of this to the point, and I'll never forget this because it was so telltale, they're so smart. They said, do you people know what you're doing? And I said, well, yes and no. We do, but we have yet to see. And the promise we made to each other, and this is another way of answering the question, and now I'll be quiet, is we will not know anything until we've at least done it for 3 years. So, and that was another promise we extracted from the dean. We said, we will report to you dutifully, as honestly as we can, because we'd be stupid if we didn't, and we're not that stupid. We will tell you everything. We will not hide anything, but you need to allow us to continue to explore this for 3 years. If at the end of the 3 years we come to the conclusion that it's a bad idea, or we don't know how to do it, or whatever it is, then fine, end of story. But up until then, we need to have the freedom to explore. And the student feedback then, in no time at all, was exactly that it was intellectually liberating to them. They found it intriguing. And to this day, the key consequence has been, guess what? Retention into upper levels of instruction. For people that are not majors, we have very few majors, which in most administrative settings would cut you off right up front, and that was another promise we extracted from the dean. We said, do not count majors, count upper level enrollments, because in the end, everybody says languages in totally different environments. At Georgetown, that means international relations, government, psychology, theology, you name it. If we can get those folks who do not need to study German anymore to waste their few courses that they have as electives by sitting in on a literature course in German, although they are a government major, what else do you want from us? And that was convincing. And we have retained that. So the upper level course enrollments, I think we can directly attribute to the fact that this literacy development continues in a very carefully thought through way within the entire curricular environment, is enticing to them. And this goes to the policy people just like everybody else.
Good. Thank you. Any follow-up questions by the audience? Yes?
Do you think that there is a place for the solicitation and incorporation of the undergraduate student opinion, both prior to and during that curricular process though as well?
Yes, we did study after study after study. And I should say this positively because we had the enormous benefit, and I say this publicly here once more, we had John Norris working with us on this project at the time. And if if you know John Norris's work in assessment, you will know that we didn't get away scot-free on anything. That we, in fact, redid our entire assessment procedure, but we didn't figure that out until we were 3 semesters in. And we said, oh no, in addition to everything else that we brought on ourselves, we now need to completely rethink assessment. And so assessment within the program was rethought completely, and then waves of questionnaire kind of studies, the best one being where we literally went back to we maintain a very good record of our graduates, where we asked alumni from years and years back. That's all published actually in a very nice article by John Norris and Peter Pfeiffer, who was department chair at the time, actually one by me also, where we carefully looked at the assessment of what does any of this mean? Did it change anything? And what was it that it changed? And did it make a hoot's worth of difference for you as far as your professional life is concerned? Yeah.
Thank you. The next question is, how do you propose that traditionally bifurcated departments engage in curricular development when one side, usually literature, often diminishes the contributions of the other language or linguistics, other languages or linguistics?
Right. That, of course, is the typical interpretation that is given to the bifurcated language department. You can't start a project like that unless you have a sense of the ethical and moral commitment of the entire group to bettering the educational experience of their students. If you don't have that, you can't start. It's a futile undertaking. But I think in most departments, it is not, and I will use biblical language, good Jesuit tradition, it's not that the spirit isn't willing, it's the flesh that doesn't know how to do it. They are interested in doing this, but you have to remember that these are people that are in lit-crit work. All of my colleagues are literary cultural researchers. They are top-notch folk in their field. And yet, the major challenge in the department is, how do we assure that the language abilities that we need in order to run the show intellectually, validly, the way we're interested in doing, we need to make sure that language learning takes place in the way we need it. So I actually wrote a dialogic article with a colleague who was then naughtily hired away from the University of London because of her research record this long. They needed it in order to get money in London, so they hired Susanne Court away from me. But to show you, so top-notch researcher, and she said, the reason I'm on board as a colleague of yours, although I am not interested in applied linguistics, I am interested in making sure that the students that we have in this department are able to do the kind of literary cultural scholarship that I would like to see happening here. And for that, I'm game. For the next 3 years, let's see what happens. And she created one of the first courses that was a hoot and a half. It fit her beautifully. She was a specialist in 18th century literature, and she said, look who's laughing, German comedy. And of course, everybody laughed, because there is no such thing as comedy in German. Everything is nothing but deeply sorrowful for all the reasons that we know, and it's nothing but a disaster area from beginning to end. So why is there Why is there even such a genre as a comedy? And we actually devised that course on a trip together to Philadelphia, and we were laughing our heads off together. And I said, that's the course you're going to teach, with that kind of a literacy focus right from the beginning.
I think I have a follow-up question to that question that I will read. It says that at the end of the day, do faculty or departments truly want to take such an introspective look at themselves and potentially be confronted with the idea they may have to make vast changes?
I think the climate has never been better. And certainly the MLA report, for those of you who are at all familiar with that document and had any connection to foreign language departments, the level of enthusiasm and level of excitement that was created by that document was just unbelievable, because people, in a way, were willing to take the mirror in front of their faces and say, well, yes, doesn't look pretty, but that is exactly correct. That is how bad things are. Can we move forward? And to me, there are two big sadnesses in this, and I have said this and not necessarily made myself popular with the leadership in the MLA, but since I had done lots of work for them, I felt that I could say that. I said, they missed the opportunity to seek major funding for the kind of work that departments need to do and need to have expertise for. Much like Roy was saying, he's getting funding for this wonderful pedagogical work that he does with his secondary school teachers most of the time. The same kind of development would be necessary in higher education departments to start thinking in a curricular way. They didn't do it. And the reason why I was sad about that is because they had done exactly that. And I was part of the grant writing team at the time when we had 6 summer institutes in the late 80s and early 90s to shift from grammar-driven teaching to more communicative teaching. We had 3-week summer institutes that were funded by the NEH and the Mellon Foundation. That's what should have happened. That's sadness number 1. And sadness number 2 is that from the SLA side, you can see my conflicted existence, having been on both sides of the house for my entire professional career, is that the SLA community took essentially no interest in the fact that help was needed. And here would be a way to, as I said, not do a rescue mission, but actually do something that would be intellectually so exciting, because deep down, this is what we claim the whole project to be about. We would like to enhance the ability of language learners to be better. What do departments need to do in order to make that possible?
Any follow-up questions? If not, I do have.
I think it's still doable, because there's enough of the history of that report that still resides in departments, maybe even by minimally shaming them. Sometimes that's a useful thing to do, not too often, to say, these are things that your own professional organization, because the MLA, of course, represents the lit cult folk, big time. It's the biggest humanities professional organization in the country. It has everybody in English departments, the big elephants on any campus, and all the foreign language departments. It is your own professional organization that came up with this report. And it seems like that would be something that would give you the necessary backing in your institution to actually start doing a project like that. Because you do need to watch your behind and your front and everything else in university politics, and I can sing many songs on that one.
Of course, you mentioned that it's doable and it's timely and so on, but here the question asks that a program evaluation for foreign language development can often be perceived negatively by the faculty. What do you think is manifesting these fears? Fear of change, fear of being told that they are not good teachers, or that they simply don't care?
None of the above. As I said, you cannot start out like that, and I can say that for not just my own colleagues, but colleagues in other departments who have not, found it useful to do what we ended up doing. You cannot doubt people's commitment. I just think that's exactly the wrong way to go about it. You have to assume that they're committed to the enterprise. And as I said earlier, it's unlikely to be useful and to be too negative, because chances are, and again, this is not just a strategic move, they will have done lots of good things. This is not that they're bad teachers, whatever a bad teacher is, who knows that. But you can turn the whole matter around and make a very simple, but I think very persuasive argument. No matter how good you are in your individual course, the students traverse an entire program. And to the extent we as a faculty can make that a coherent experience, then saying, good here, good here, good here, good here, instead of saying, good here in a longitudinal way that was thought through by the entire group, wouldn't you wish to be on board? Particularly if your voice were taken seriously. And of course, this is another thing. We have adjunct faculty too. They had to be part of the discussion. They sit in on faculty meetings. There is no other way. A curriculum is, as I said in one article, takes the whole village. It is not a single course. It is everybody with a certain understanding of this is how we're imagining the development of advanced levels of ability in this program. Can we pull it off?
Thank you. Any other question? Yes.
Does this question have to be a follow-up to any of those that you're reading? Can this take the discussion in a different direction?
You can take it any way you want to.
But he's got some more questions. Go with the questions.
Yes, I have 2 more questions, and I think just a few more minutes,
Yeah.
or maybe 3. And so I'll ask that question, which is in fact a follow-up question to some extent, and has to do with students teaching that you mentioned, that students have to be involved at both teaching level and also their opinion when it comes to curriculum. The question is, how do we address the issue of many PhD students lacking appropriate teaching skills, or PhDs lacking appropriate teaching skills, who then pass down those inabilities to the next generation of academics?
It's a very, very important question to ask, because most graduate students, of course, just like our undergraduate students, have experienced language teaching in a certain way. And so part of the task that we have as a graduate program is actually to socialize our graduate students in a totally different way. And it's rather an eye-opener for them. We have the privilege and probably something that for us is an indispensable situation is that they do not need to teach the first year. Instead, they participate in quote-unquote methods course, which of course it isn't, but with very extensive discussions along those lines and concurrent observation of the entire curriculum, so that they observe, and this is what, for the first 3 weeks, this is what it looks like in level 1. We do not call any of it language or content courses anymore. Level 1 looks like this, level 2 looks like this, level 3 looks like this, level 4 looks like this. And this is what we hope to achieve. Level 4 courses are attained in 4 intensive semesters. These are the folks that we can send to Germany into a German university without any shelter after they have started with nothing in Georgetown in 4 semesters. University of Munich by now is willing to even waive the placement, the language tests, as long as they've gotten an A- out of the famous, infamous course Text and Context, because the track record is so good that the literacy abilities that we have been able to develop will hold up. They will be challenged, but they can do it. That word gets around to the students very quickly. You're going to kill yourself in that department as far as work is concerned. But if you want to go to the University of Munich and do a political science major at Georgetown, while at the same time saying, I already know Spanish and I already know French, for Central Europe I need German, this is what you need to do. And then they're willing to do it.
Maybe quickly if you have to.
I was just gonna, it's not a question, rather a comment, and Dr. Byrnes kind of said it already. I was gonna say, for PhD students, for most PhD students, I would say it's not an inability to teach, but an unwillingness to grow professionally for less than $1,000 a month for only 9 months.
Mm-hmm. No, a program like that, and this is really what I should have added to the previous comment where I sort of sidetracked, is these are lit cult people. The majority of our graduate students are lit cult people. The ability to see their teaching responsibilities, and we allow them to teach all the way to level 4. Once they have gone through the system, and even create their own courses, initially supervised, but then you can actually create your own content-oriented course usually in the area of your dissertation. That the linkage then between the kinds of things they're actually interested in lit cult studies and the kind of approach we take, literacy-oriented approach to language teaching, is so close that it becomes an intellectually interesting enterprise rather than over here is my research and over here is how I'm going to pay for the expensive apartment in Georgetown because I need, the fellowship that I have will allow me to survive. That's not an argument anymore. They see that connection, and it's a very stimulating connection for them to see.
Unfortunately, we have run out of time, although I have 3 more questions, and I'm sure that Heidi would be happy to.
Jack, I had that question.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can we go ahead?
We can talk later. Yes. No, we
Oh,
have-
okay. So if there are any questions, then they can approach Heidi, and I'm sure that I would be happy to
Happy to
interact
talk
with
to
you and
anybody
talk to you.
afterwards.
So thank you very much.
Thanks very much.